have something happening in Texas, but this really actually is relevant to elections and campaigns all around this country. And I want to tell you the story of Texas, what's happening here, and which is where I am, in the great state of Texas, and tell you how much it matters really to all of America. In Texas, we happen to have our state legislature only meets once every other year, as compared with many states where it's kind of an ongoing thing like Congress is in Washington. But in Texas, it's a 6-month session every other year. And so it's a really big deal during that 6 months. Everything that actually has to get passed has to go through the process, get the right committee, get on the floor, and goes back and forth between the House and the Senate. And in Texas, we had a new speaker in the House. We have a Republican majority in the House and the Senate in Texas, and we have a Republican governor. So people assume that Texas will likely be able to put forward fairly Republican-style legislation. Well, this past session was just ended this past Monday. There was a new Speaker of the House, and this Texas GOP speaker. His name is Dennis Bonnen. It was his first time to serve as Speaker of the House. Speaker of the House is an enormous responsibility, and he essentially can control which pieces of legislation get to committees that will review the legislation, listen to input from constituents, amend, blah, blah, get it on the floor of the House. It's a very powerful role, the Speaker of the House. And on the Senate side, there is a similar role, although that is conducted by the Lieutenant Governor in Texas. But back to the Texas House and what happened. So this legislative session, there were many, many conservative agenda items that did not move forward, did not get passed. I'm going to dedicate a show next week to talking about that. But today I want to talk about what Speaker Bonnen said in an interview, I believe it was yesterday, related to this year and a half we have in between before the next Texas session comes up, before the session 2 years from now. In between those 2 years, every single member of the Texas House will be up for re-election because they are 2-year terms, unlike the Texas Senate, which is 4-year terms. But the Texas House, every single member of the Texas House will be up for re-election. Bonnen said, Speaker Bonnen, Republican Speaker Bonnen, announced in an interview yesterday that he is instituting a policy of banning members, and he means elected Democrat and Republican elected members of the Texas State House. He is instituting a policy banning members from engaging in electoral campaigns against each other, preventing them from endorsing, financially contributing, or otherwise assisting in races against incumbents. And he's not just saying this about the Republican members of the Texas State Legislature. It's not just the Republicans. He is the Speaker of the whole House, meaning he's the Speaker of, there's one Speaker, and the majority party gets to choose their Speaker. So he's the Republican Speaker, but he's Speaker for all. He is putting in place a policy saying no members of the Texas House are permitted in this year and a half before the elections, before the next Texas House meets in 2 years, can engage in campaigns on behalf of anyone challenging an incumbent, whether that incumbent is a Democrat or Republican. So say you're a Republican member of the Texas State House and you know of a great person, you'd love to have that person run and try to represent a district in Texas currently represented by a Democrat. So you might, in normal circumstances, as a Republican elected official, say, yeah, I'm going to get behind, Joe or Sue or whoever it is, to try to get that person to challenge an incumbent Democrat and try to get that Republican, that seat to turn over from Democrat to Republican. This is very common. And even if, as a legislator, you don't get involved in a race like that, people are always asking for your support, your advice. Members of the Texas State Legislature, naturally, because they are politically active, they're tuned into the Texas legislature, they're regularly asked to endorse, to contribute, to speak for candidates. Now, you may wonder what the power is that Bonnen has to enforce this policy because, as they say, can't take away Christmas, but he can make your life miserable in the Texas State Legislature. He can hold back money from your reelection campaign. So he has tremendous power. Everyone in the Texas House knows this. And to be clear, This guy is trying to enforce this against even Democrats, who I'm going to guess don't really care that much what he thinks. This is on top of a statement this Bonin made just a few weeks ago, or just last week, essentially mentioning some particular Democrat by name and saying, it'd be a really great thing if the Texas legislature turns Democrat. This guy, whatever it was, he'd be a great Speaker of the Texas House. What this says about the ruling class mentality is really the point of today's first five. Number one, this guy, one person, a Speaker of the Texas House, is essentially deciding he knows better than every member of the Texas House, every Republican member, every Democrat member, every elected official in the Texas House. He knows better about whether or not they should get involved in somebody else's campaign. Now, he offered a reason. He said, it gets very divisive, it gets tough. We have these, elections, and we have members who are supporting a primary opponent against some other member, or they're supporting a Republican running to try to take a Democrat seat away. And it makes for acrimony, tension, and not the collegial spirit that people want to see among the legislators. So his argument is, it makes things rough when you get to the legislative session if people have to work together on legislation when they both know that in the off season between legislative sessions that a guy in their committee, a woman in their committee, was actually supporting another person, tried to take their job away. So what Speaker Bonin is saying, this is a ruling, elitist, ruling class mindset. The number one is saying the ruling class knows better. All the club members, all the people who made it into the legislature, they're the club. Everybody else who didn't get elected or who hasn't yet run and who might want to run, everybody else is not part of the club. They're not to be welcomed to the club. They're not to be helped in getting into the club. He is deciding for the legislators in the entire Texas House that he knows better than they do whether the trade-off is worth it. Because some members might say, you know what, this particular guy on the other side, he's so bad, he's so obstreperous, he so opposes my agenda that I want to find someone to run against him. And if you are a legislator, you take the risk. You might jump into that race, you might help that other candidate, and that candidate loses, and you're back in the legislature next time with the same person there that you didn't like last time, the same person you tried to take out. Okay, welcome to being a grown-up. Welcome to being a politician. If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. If you are so frightened by the idea of having to deal with a legislator in the session who you worked against in the off session, don't do it. No one's making the legislators do that. But this guy is deciding, this ruling class, elitist, we are the ruling class, we decide, he's deciding for all the other legislators that he knows better than they, the good, the ups and downs, the pros and cons of getting involved in somebody else's campaign. This is a rotten, horrible, un-American, un-Texan idea for this to have, and I so far have not heard legislators complaining about this. Another thing about what this policy is doing, it's really telling the grassroots, the activists in both parties, on both sides of the aisle, is telling activists, buzz off. Shut up. Stop working to take out a club member. Stop hassling us. Leave us alone. We have our club here. You people out there in the, especially in the Republican side, the conservative, the grassroots types, they have been unhappy this whole session because the session didn't go very well for the conservative agenda. It didn't go well at all for the conservative agenda. So a lot of people have been talking during the session online and social media about, this person, that candidate, this elected official, maybe we should try to run someone against him. This speaker is taking the attitude, telling the grassroots, leave us alone. We are the rulers. You are the peasants. You are the people. You're the common people. Just be quiet. Let the ruling class rule. So this guy, Bonin, this is his first session as Speaker. And the Speaker's race is always very controversial, it's just a highly controversial process. There was a previous Speaker here in Texas who was, never, ever fulfilled the conservative agenda. And so it was a big deal to finally get a new Speaker in. And I have yet to hear any elected Republicans in the Texas House speak up and saying, you know what, Speaker Bonin, you're wrong. This is a wrong thing for you to say. It's a wrong thing for you to do. I have yet to hear that. I hope I do. I hope I hear some leadership, some leaders in the Republican House saying, you don't tell us whether we can do this. And one last fact, and I'll wrap up the first 5, is this. In other legislative sessions, when Governor Abbott, our Republican governor, when other people, power brokers in the Republican Party in Texas, have not liked the conduct of an elected Republican in the House or the Senate, the powers that be, the GOP, the governor, the Republican Party, they get behind challengers to elected officials all the time. They say, you know what, this person, man or woman, they're off the reservation. They're not following the deal Republicans are supposed to follow. So there is history for people getting behind challenging an incumbent. This guy, one session, power's gone to his head, and he is saying no one in this entire Texas House better dare challenge an incumbent. They all get to stay because they're in the club. This is ruling class elitism. It is ugly. It is wrong. And I'm very much hoping to hear some voices on the Republican and frankly on the Democrat side saying, you can't tell us that. You can't decide for us. I hope so, because what you're seeing here, this little microcosm example I gave you, this is what happens in Washington all the time. You have the circling of the wagons around incumbent politicians, Democrat and Republican, where you have politicians clearly not listening to their voters, not following what they promise they do in their campaigns, where you have people trying to work in the states to remove these senators, remove these elected officials and other House members in the U.S. Congress, and you have this ruling class elitism clobbering the grassroots, really clobbering the voters over the head, saying, be quiet and go home now, because we get to tell you who's in charge around here.